The next talk is Meet the Technical Committee, and the panel is composed of David Bremner, Gunnar Wolf, Margarita Manterola, and Tollef Fog Heen. I look forward to listening to you, and I'll leave this here at this time.
Thank you. Okay, I sent an email yesterday saying that this will not be the same talk as previous years. This means that I will very quickly go through the slides that are basically the same as last year's. And then the idea is to have some time to discuss other things. So let's get started. If I get the clicker to work. Or maybe I just have to click. Yeah, OK. So this is the current list of people that are in the technical committee. You have David, Tollef, Gunnar, and me here at Debconf. And then Philip Hans, Simon McBeatty, Didier Rabud, and Nico Tini are not here, unfortunately. It's very hard to get the whole of the technical committee to be present at a single Debconf. OK. This is a long list of everybody that has served in the technical committee. This list used to be short when we didn't have rotation, right? And since we started having rotation, the list of people that had served in the past became longer. All right, so what is the technical committee? The technical committee is a body that is in the Constitution. So that means that we are bound to what the Constitution says about us. And the Constitution says that we decide on matters of technical policy, that we make decisions when it's not clear who has to make the decision, that we break ties when there's like two people that disagree, we decide what the thing is. We overrule developers when like someone has done something and there's like no other recourse, we overrule developers. And we also offer advice. So that last one is the mild one, and all the others are kind of like the strong hammer ones. In the Constitution, it's also stated that we discuss everything in public. So we have a public mailing list, and all the discussions happen there. We have a public IRC channel, so we also have our meetings there. Everything is done in public. We cannot do detailed design work, so if we have to decide among options, the options have to have been pre-designed by someone else. We can only decide among options. We cannot design the options. And we only make decisions as a last resort. So what this means is that we are asked to break ties among available options. We cannot come up with our own options. And we are only invoked after all efforts to solve it via consensus have been tried and failed. Basically, when a flame war is already ongoing. And we can offer advice at any point, but it's just advice. It carries like no extra weight, except the technical committee advised this, but it's not an actual decision. We are self-nominated, so the technical committee decides who they want to self-nominate to be part of the committee. The DPL then appoints each of the members. And yeah, as I said, it's a last resort. So, a quick recap of what we did since the last Debconf. There were two issues on which we actually made a decision. The first issue was ongoing during last Debconf, and it was whether vendor-specific patches in D package are allowed. In Chris's talk about Lintian, he said that the Debian policy maintainers decided this, but actually it was us that decided that it's actually a bug. And yeah, so since then it's a bug if a package uses vendor-specific D package, it's serious, whatever. And then the other decision that we had to take was whether the bootstrap, the user merge thing, the bootstrap switched to having user merge by default, and someone complained that this was not right, and we discussed this a lot, and finally decided that we would not override the bootstrap maintainers, so we would let the bootstrap maintainers do whatever they were doing And then we had a tie. So I had to use my casting vote, which I didn't like. But in the end, the tie was between two options that were kind of not very different. So what we decided about this is that for Bullseye, both directory schemes are allowed. So user merge and non-merge are both allowed. And packages should be able to build on both schemes, basically. Basically, we said for Bullseye, we should support both. But in the way that we decided this, it's more like this is what we advise rather than anything else, because the release team is the one that actually has whatever, the scope of this. And then we had 4 things on which we didn't decide. We didn't actually have to do a formal resolution. So we were asked what happens when maintainer script failed to restart a service, which after a long discussion, we ended up deciding this is not just about restarting services. It's about any time a maintainer script encounters a problem, what should happen? Well, what should happen is that someone else should develop something, because we cannot do design work, we cannot develop the thing. But yeah, we recommended that someone develops a better notification method. But we declined to rule on the actual question because there was like no good answer to the question. Then we had a bug about like give advice on state libraries in a higher precedence path entry, whatever. There was advice was given. So we can give advice. There was no need for a formal resolution. Then there was this thing about like a package shipping Dune and like which package is allowed to ship a binary called Dune. And this was resolved without our intervention. The committee took too long, and by the time we were there, it had been resolved already. And finally, requirements for being a pre-dependency of bin init. Again, we declined to rule. We agreed that the init system helpers maintainers are the ones that decide this. And we gave some advice as to like what we think would make sense, but it's up to them. And currently, we have one ongoing bug. So for next Debconf, this hopefully will be in one of the 2 previous slides. How to handle fail to build from source bugs in release architectures. This is about non-standard configurations, like fail to build from source on some configurations, but not all of them. This is the ongoing bug. OK. Some words about term expiry. It turns out this is super hard to calculate, but this is Debian, so it had to be hard, right? We couldn't just say, after 5 years you're out. It had to be very complicated. So the term expiry is that on January 1st of a year, the 2 people that have been in the committee for more than 42 months will expire their term at the end of that year. So this is so complicated that last year, like, we got it wrong. We thought that Tollef and Didier would be out at the end of 2018, but it ended up being at the end of 2019, because it's too hard to calculate. But I looked really hard, and I think I got it right this time. Anyway, we are 8 developers, and we cannot have less than 4. And we are basically looking for new members every year, because like this is the list of expiry terms. And this is if nobody decides to resign, because people can resign at any time. So like, if any of the people in the list decide to resign, then everything gets scrambled, because there's also a rule of only 2 per year. So yeah, it's complicated. All right, so that's kind of like the typical technical committee presentation. All of you know everything that you need to know about the technical committee. And now this is the interesting part of the presentation, which is things aren't going very well. I showed you slides where we had like 2 decisions and 4 non-decisions. And that's not just the problem. So part of the issue is that, as the Constitution says, escalations need to be done as last resort. So that means that by the time a problem reaches the technical committee, it's already a flame war. So it already got into ugly state, ugly conversation mode. It's already hard to reason with people by the time they escalate with us. Then there are some developers, I changed this, some developers that don't like us, people that will directly refuse to talk to us. It's like, no, I will not discuss anything with the technical committee, or people that if a bug is escalated in their package, they will just orphan the package because there's nothing good can come out of discussing with the technical committee. And this is basically because our main power is to overrule and decide between two options, and like those that are on the losing option don't like to be on the losing side, and those that are overruled don't like to be overruled. So like they basically don't like all the bad outcomes that can come from an escalation. But that's not just, it's also very slow because we have to have discussions on a mailing list, and that takes forever. And it's exhausting, and it's a game of the person that sends the most emails wins. Or not exactly, but kind of. It's the person that sends the most emails is the one that gets their voice heard. So we also decline to rule a lot, and this is because many reasons. Sometimes it's because they hadn't actually exhausted all possible options. Sometimes it's because they ask us to overrule a decision that we cannot overrule. We cannot overrule a decision done by a delegate. So if it's FTP master or release team or any other team that is a delegate, we cannot overrule those. We can only overrule developers. And also, because we cannot do design work, we can only pick options. And so if the options aren't there to pick, we can't help. So how can we make this better? The caveat here is that changing what the TC does probably means changing the constitution, although depending on what we want to change. But we can also change the constitution. It takes a GR and voting and whatever, but it's possible. And then, so the questions that I have for everyone in the audience, including my fellow committee members, is there a way we could keep the purpose of the committee, which is to solve disagreement, but avoid the flame wars and broken relationships that the years and years of the technical committee have shown happen as the current way it works? And so, and what can we do to have discussions with people, technical discussions, without them having shut down or like resort to orphaning their packages because they can't deal with us? Okay, that was my presentation, and now I want to hear what people have to say.
Well, I know there's people in the audience that think that technical committee should be abolished, so that's one way to quote unquote solve the problem. It would also solve our recruiting problem.
So, speaking with my DPL hat firmly on, I find myself in a kind of an interesting challenge, because it's one of my jobs in general to support the teams of the project. And yet, you know, it is kind of, I ask, hey, could I bring this issue to the technical committee? Would that be a reasonable thing to do? And so I got a perfectly fine response from you guys saying, actually, we'd rather you not. There's another process you could use instead. And that was great. But I also got a response, you know, from someone in the community that said, the technical committee doesn't have the, you know, the necessary trust of the community for you to do that. And what was interesting to me is no one disagreed with that. So if it gets, I actually think that the DPL could be very helpful in driving, if you decide you do want changes and decide that you're open to a process that might lead into a constitutional amendment. I think the DPL could be very helpful in getting to in driving some discussion. And if we got down to a small, finite number of GR options, you know, the DPL even does have the power to bring an issue to a vote very quickly. And I think that it would be appropriate to use that power after a project discussion if basically the dominant options were put on the ballot. But that's something I would only feel comfortable doing if you guys said, yeah, we really want to start a change process and we would like you involved in it. I mean, I guess there might be a level of dysfunction where I started doing that my own, but we're definitely not there. I would much rather be working with you. And so if you get to a point where you want to approach me, one, I do have some personal ideas. Two, I think the DPL can be helpful in facilitating that kind of thing, but I would much rather that be a cooperative process, and I would much rather be approached by you and asked to engage that way.
So just as a point of order, I disagree with, from a methodological point of view, I disagree with taking one unchallenged posting on a mailing list as indicative of anything very much about the Debian community. So, I mean, it may well be that the community doesn't trust the technical committee, but I would prefer a better way of understanding that than taking one mail from the list.
Yeah, I'm Ian Jackson. So I agree with many of the things, the criticisms, and I think this is, you know, in some sense largely my fault. I did this set this up when I was young and naive, and I thought that problems were just technical problems, and we could all, you know, if we just had the technically right answer. But I've come to see that much of the time, maybe not always, but much of the time, disagreements involve trade-offs, and they involve, you know, like squishy human stuff much more often, and they often involve the different interests of different people. And the focus on technical, you know, the word technical keeps coming up, technical, does not really allow the TC to kind of address those points. And I see that as another problem of this, essentially of this setup. So I think the TC is set up to fail. Unfortunately, I don't think I'm well placed to know what should be done about this. I don't think I have the, you know, certainly I think that many people will disagree with me on many things about this. They might not disagree with me on what I just said. I know that even people who disagreed with me on individual things have agreed with me on that last point. So I'm going to step back now and hope that other people will be able to fix my mess. My apologies.
Thank you. I think I largely agree with what you just said. And I think that part of our problem, especially on the social side, stems from a lot of it. Both we're seen as a very, very nuclear option. So it's the, whenever you get the TC involved, you're kind of pulling in the heavy artillery. But also what leads people to orphan their packages instead of going through the entire process is because it's not entirely unlike a public trial, which is super stressful. And I don't know what the right solution to reducing that amount of stress is. I'm not saying that, oh, we should conduct everything in secret, but it feels like doing that in public, in that kind of forum, doesn't work for a bunch of the social issues.
My take on this is that, I mean, the issue, the reason why the committee was created is that there are some problems that are just hard to solve in a sensible way. I mean, as Marga said, we are a last resort body. And you come to a last resort body, well, I mean, we cannot enter a discussion earlier because it has not been proven necessary, and it would be like digging where nobody's calling us. So I'm not saying that's the way it should be, but I mean, I think is basically a team where, well, we get to the point where something is rotten, and we have to, well, try to get out of that situation. And I don't think there's much of a way to do this without, well, some bad feelings. I don't know.
For me, listening to this conversation, it sounds like what is kind of required is the step of a mediation before the technical committee gets involved, both on making sure that all the previous making sure that all the previous steps have been exhausted, and also making sure that we have enough information going into the discussions with the technical committee as well. So if we go to like a fairy wonderland, if you will, with me, how I see the process, how it could work better, is that whenever the discussion starts, somebody from the discussion flags discussion to the technical committee as potentially being interesting in the future, and then maybe in an unofficial capacity, one of the technical committee members starts following that discussion. Make sure that all the possible avenues are fulfilled. Also already starts gathering the information in case it goes to the technical committee on the possible positions and options. And then the technical committee is already kind of involved, but maybe not quite officially involved. I don't know if it does actually needs a constitutional amendment to make this work. And then you have, first of all, the technical committee involved in discussions earlier on a software basis. It is more seen in the community as acting without using the nuclear hammer. And when it comes to the decision, the person that in the technical committee who was involved for a while in this discussion can present these sides already immediately to the rest of the committee as an observer, and that process of decision could also take faster at that point.
Right. I'll retake the words. Yeah. Sorry. I like your ideas, but there's always a but. The thing is, yes, many of the issues we have worked on don't come from mailing list discussions, but they come from bugs, bug reports where, well, suddenly somebody got tired and decided to escalate. So yes, of course, getting a flag of attention would be great. Would be great to be able to diffuse the things earlier on, but sometimes it's just something that remained unsolved for several years with no interaction until somebody decides, well, I don't want this bug open anymore, I'm going to reassign it to the committee. So I don't know, I understand your idea about mediation. We're supposed to be some sort of mediators ourselves, but I don't think it is achievable as stated.
I've never been completely comfortable with this idea of technical committee members doing things, but that's not the technical committee. I mean, it feels like, okay, it's working around the rules, and I mean, okay, if that's what we have to do, fine, but if we think that that's an appropriate role for members of the technical committee, then we should, maybe get that in writing and just agree that that's how the, whenever we in the past have had technical committee members saying, well, this is my private opinion, which sometimes makes sense, but I'm nervous about it as a, I think it's a way that we lose trust if we're always lying in some technical way, right? Anyway, so that's just me.
Isn't it always a challenge that there's no, you can't act as an individual member of the technical, it's a little bit like the same thing you're saying, where there's no way for me or you to involve ourselves in a discussion as a member of the technical committee.
Right. Well,
like
it's also
in the constitutional sense.
if one of the FTP masters says, well, this is just my personal opinion, but this license is crap. That would be odd.
What
right?
does that actually mean?
Well, I mean okay, now I guess I should change that license, right? Because...
Or hope it's reviewed by somebody else?
Well, that doesn't seem like a... Anyway,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, what I mean is it's kind of undefined what that actually means.
Right, yeah. No, you don't know what to take away from that.
I think that means that the person speaks before the team has an opinion. I think persons can speak when they want. It's better if they speak when the team has an opinion. But what I want to say about the technical committee, I think I largely agree with what Gunnar said before. It's partly unavoidable that there's bad feelings. And from when I look at the decisions, I think you've done a great job in the last year, including declining so many decisions to take. I've personally come to found more to ask the release team to decide something, the FTP masters, and hardly ever think of you, also the policy people. But I think it's good that there's a technical body, and I don't think it's the nuclear option. I think it's a big bomb, but the nuclear option, in my opinion, is a GR. So thanks for your work.
Thanks, Holger.
Yeah, thanks, although I disagree. Is this actually done? Yeah? Okay. So, I mean, what I think is, in an ideal world, let's imagine for a moment an ideal world, not the current world, a different one, where when there are two developers that disagree about something, they go to the technical committee makes a decision, and both developers are happy with this decision, right? So this is the ideal world. What would the technical committee in that ideal world have to do, or how would it operate so that this can actually happen, so that the two developers come out happy with the decision, even the one that, like, their decision was not the one that the TC chose, but they come out happy because they feel that they were listened and that they understand the rationale and that they can still keep working in the project even though the different choice was chosen, right? And this is what I think, like, how can we change the TC so that this actually becomes a reality and not just a weird utopia?
Thanks. I'm thinking about the session that we just had about managing, and it sort of feels like there's a few, maybe it was on purpose that it was scheduled before this one. So I have no understanding of this or what the issues are, and I was wondering, maybe if I do ask a noob question, maybe it's a way to explore this a bit more. So if I ask you 3 questions, and if this is useless, don't respond to it. But maybe if each of you, in your own words, not going back to the rules and quoting them, but just in your own words say, why are you on this committee and what do you expect it to do? If you want to leave, what would be your main reason for leaving? And what are the patterns that Daniel was talking about that needs to be broken? Because maybe we just don't have a good understanding of what this does and what it's supposed to do, and maybe that's where some of the issue starts, maybe. Yeah, the middle one was, if you want to leave, if you get to that point where you just feel like it's useless, what would be your main reason for leaving? Because maybe that gets you the pressure points. No, like, I mean, if you feel like me when something goes wrong, you're just like, I don't even know if I want to do this anymore. But what is that one thing that you would say is the reason for that, if you feel that way? Yeah.
Okay. So I guess I'll start by virtue of being on the end of the table. It's a good question. I guess it's a question of wanting to help the project in some not completely well-defined way. So maybe I should, you know, I wish you asked me that before I joined. Maybe I think the question of why I would leave is actually easier, and that would just be exhaustion in terms of the amount of energy, emotional and other kinds of energy that the process could take. It hasn't been so bad. Well, the stuff that happens within the committee hasn't been so bad. There hasn't been a very low level of rancor within the committee. So thank you, fellow committee members, for that. So what was the other question?
What are the patterns that need to be broken?
What are the patterns that need to be broken? So I think this has really been expressed, right? I mean, the pattern is somehow the consensus is that the bad pattern is built into the definition of the committee, whether that's true or not, but that being a last resort decision maker comes with certain baggage. So maybe we need to sort of step outside that consensus and you know, does it have to be like that? But that seems like the pattern.
Yeah, so I feel pretty similar in that why I'm on the committee is to help out, but also because the questions we get they're always hard. I mean, whenever somebody comes to the TC, but whether they're asking for advice or they're asking us to break a tie, it is genuinely because there isn't, it's not you know, trivial, the answer is whatever. It's always that hard challenge of finding out what is the right balance here, what are the trade-offs, and sometimes that's really hard because it's not just the obvious ones, it's also the second and third order effects of what you do. And I find that incredibly rewarding, but also hard. It's a challenge.
If I can, yeah, so I want to agree and just say that I learn a lot from the problems that people bring us. That might not be confidence inspiring, but that's the truth, is that I learn a lot from these things.
Well, it may not be confidence inspiring, but it's really also very close to what I feel. I mean, I also joined, well, first of all, because, well, I was invited to, then I denied. Then sometime later I said, well, yes, I mean, the committee does interesting things. You have to get involved in issues that otherwise you wouldn't think of. So that can be bad and that can be good. I joined also to learn more about the rough sides, the rough issues in the project. Somebody told me that I was good at, well, understanding more than one side to each discussion. I kind of believe that, I don't know why. And well, as they say, by the way, it's a happy sysadmin day. It's a tough job, but somebody said I had to do it. Well, why would I leave? Yeah, out of frustration if I feel we're not advancing. And this is connected to the, what was it?
What are the patterns?
The patterns, yes. I think the patterns, and mostly I feel this, like in the tone you presented this, is that I feel there's frustration of doing very little, of doing nothing, of saying this is not my job, of saying, well, you chose between you, so we're not needed anymore. But I think, I mean, I think we, as a teamwork, we have contributed to the solutions being better expressed and more easier to grasp by the people that will actually implement them. Of course, it's frustrating sometimes to start debating whether a solution could be found in this and this and this way until somebody says, hey, that's design, detailed design work. We're not supposed to do that. It's sometimes, because that's what we do. We're programmers. We are not allowed to do it, but I don't know. It is fun after all.
Okay. Why I joined the TC? Because basically they convinced me that I should, because I would bring a different point of view, and I think that it's important for the composition of the TC to have different people from different areas of expertise, so that when we attack a problem, we can see it from many different points of view. If we are all experts on the same thing, then we will have blind spots. Why would I leave? Mainly because of the flame wars. I do not like flame wars, and we have to go through flame wars whenever there's like some issue that is not clearly one way or the other. And what are the patterns that need to be broken? Yeah, the constant flame wars. the deluge of email in general, and this thing of like, no, you're wrong, and like just saying the same thing over and over. There were people queuing up for the mic, and I really would like to hear what...
So can I just briefly interject that I really appreciated during the last year that Marga did bring a different perspective to discussions, and not because she's a woman, but because she thinks about administrating huge numbers of systems at a time. And that was really useful. I mean, okay, we didn't really resolve this thing about init systems, but it convinced me that the answer was somewhere in between.
So, you know, you ask about the ideal world where people walked away from the conflict reasonably happy. So as you know, I've been sort of thinking about what would TC 2.0 look at like for a while. I'm not going to get into that, but I'm going to start asking you some of the questions that got me down that path. And one of the things I noticed is that the release team has a fair amount of conflict. There are plenty of people who do walk away from the release team pretty grumpy with some of the decisions. But there are a huge number of people who actually walk away from the release team not all that grumpy, even when the release team says no. Even the release team says, we're going to remove this from the release and it won't be around for a couple of years, right? What's the difference there? That's, I think, a very important question to ask, because they deal with conflicts too, but there are, I think, and they deal with a lot of conflicts. And by the way, if you want to talk about email deluge, subscribe to Debian Release. That's a lot of email. But there are a number of people who do walk away even when their packages are removed and are able to accept that decision. There are others who are not able to do that.
I think I could respond to that with my own biases, which is that I personally see the release team contributing something huge and positive to Debian. And I think this is a bit like Ian's point about becoming somebody who's respected in a team because of your work. And I mean, you might or might not know our work as individual developers, but as a team, we're a bit like hedge fund managers or something, right? We don't actually do stuff. We just, you know, we just say no. And the release team makes the stable releases, right? And that gives them huge credibility.
I also think that the release team has every single case we get is different, whereas in their case, it's easier to have a stable or a set of expectations. Setting expectations for them is easier. I mean, that doesn't mean it's always easy to say no when somebody comes with, oh, but you know, it's just this little thing. But it makes it clearer for people who come there to actually understand why a decision was made in that particular way. And people understand more that they are dealing with a huge amount of requests compared to us. So they can't spend 3 months or 6 months debating a single change. They actually have to make a decision much quicker than us. And I think that sometimes builds frustration when people come to us because they will not be able to get an answer within the time frame they would like.
Hi. So going to the ideal world and possible changes, and some of these might require constitution changes, but maybe people could be happy with them. Or, for example, could a private decision, a private mediation with the technical committee, if the parties agree, be an option, right? Like you get still maybe an IRC meeting or something smaller where you talk to the committee and we see if there is an easier path without a bigger escalation. Could be something, a small award and a box of chocolate. I was overridden by the technical committee. Could be like a way to feel proud. I mean, it's half a joke, right? But we used to hate NMUs, and now we accepted them as like, and thank for them, right? So it is like, again, maybe let's not put it, okay, fine, put it in the notes like that, but let's start feeling that, sure, a decision was made, but it's not the end of the world for me as a Debian developer. It's just a decision, and there will be another decision another day. It's not going to be possible for every decision you take. There will always be a systemd, but there will always be, hopefully, other decisions that can be taken without people going super angry. And maybe the orphaning and stuff can be avoided if it can be made like small decision in a week. We have a quick meeting, we decide, move on with life. And for some of the things you described, like whether a binary should be provided or not, it's not the end of the world. And finally, a question. So only 2 of you can leave in a year. If 3 want to leave, the other one is stuck? Or anyway, thank you.
Okay. I'm sorry, your last question made me lose the finger I was pointing at there. So, yes, sometimes I notice something, I didn't mention it before, but yet we have a pattern where we do have like much quicker meetings. We have a meeting once a month on IRC, and sometimes, well, we find that a given issue is solved, but the thing is, from a happy point that is finding that out, we have to formally write a mail announcing the decision, and well, sometimes that has taken 2 months. I mean, sometimes we get to a meeting saying, oh, on that given bug, it was assigned to me, but I didn't do it. I will do it for the next, before the next meeting. So yeah, that's something bad. That's something that slows our pace, and it's quite visible. I mean, most of you don't follow the meetings, but it takes some time between decision and announcement, and we should work on that. The other thing, what you said about leaving the team, anybody can leave the technical committee. If we were to lose over half of the technical committee at any given point, we would be on a constitutional crisis, but well, whatever. We would, there are procedures to fill that gap. What this expiry means is that the automated shrinkage of the team happens by no more than 2 people at once. So if this year 3 people were appointed, 2 of them would expire at some given point in time. At today, plus 42 minus 1.
The point of that is really to make it self-synchronizing, so even if people resign, you still end up with a stable cadence, and you don't end up with what I think it was SBI who this year, one of their directors had to give up his post, and then just to end up with a stable number of people to elect every cycle.
There was a question from IRC about like time-sensitive matters, because sometimes issues are raised to the TC and they take a long time, and by the time we rule, the freeze is on, and so things are hard to fix. So usually we try to take that into account, but it's true that decisions take a long time. And the suggestion was whether we could have like 2 separate votes, one short-term vote of, I don't know, Like, if we are dealing with an urgent time matter, we can have like are we going to overrule or not vote, and then like, what are we going to do? I don't know, something like that. But that's something that needs to be taken into account on a case-by-case basis. So like, whenever we are close to the freeze for bullseye, if we have issues that are risen at that time, we need to like take that into account and make sure we don't like block people from working because of the freeze. But I'm not sure that's like something that needs to be changed in the way we worked.
We should all be less busy.
Sure.
Differently busy.
We are out of time. Yeah, so I've been taking notes in the Gobi. It's called Tech, which is the abbreviation used for the technical committee. Feel free to drop your ideas there, and then maybe we can keep discussing this on the next technical committee meeting, which happens on the 3rd Wednesday of every month at 19 UTC, right? Yeah.
And the meetings are public for a reason. So, #Debian.
Yes, Debian. All right. Thank you very much.